Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was a gentle afternoon in the English countryside, and I found myself once again in the company of my old friend, Hercule Poirot. We were seated in a dainty little tea room called La Petite Douceur, the kind of establishment that attracted wealthy widows, over-perfumed débutantes, and, most importantly to Poirot, a respectable patisserie chef. The detective himself was inspecting a lemon tart with the scrutiny of a jeweller examining a diamond. "Mon ami," he said, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a starched napkin. "Do you see how the custard glistens? The symmetry of the lattice? Precision, order. These are the virtues of true civilization." I sipped my tea and chuckled. "You do realize, Poirot, that we're just having cake." He gave me a look of wounded dignity. "Cake? Non. This, Hastings, is art. The English palate, I fear, is far too forgiving of sponge and buttercream. But here is where patisserie rises to poetry." The room buzzed gently with conversation and the clink of fine china. Outside the large windows, spring sunlight filtered through the budding trees. For a fleeting moment, I believed that we might spend the afternoon without incident, without mystery. But with Poirot, tranquility never lasted long. The bell above the tea room's door chimed, and a young woman entered, her movements swift and uncertain. She wore a pale blue dress, elegant but creased, as though she'd dressed in haste. Her gloves were mismatched. Her eyes darted around the room before they landed, almost with a gasp, on Poirot. She approached with a breathless urgency. "Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot rose immediately, bowing slightly. "Mademoiselle, you have the advantage of me. My name is Cecilia Harrow. I'm terribly sorry to intrude. I know this is unusual, but I recognized you from the papers, and I didn't know where else to turn." She glanced nervously toward the staff, then leaned in. "It's Lady Agatha Morecombe. Something dreadful happened at her birthday party. And now, something is wrong with her." "Lady Agatha Morecombe," Poirot repeated, tilting his head. "A name not unfamiliar in certain circles, n'est-ce pas, Hastings?" I nodded. "Old family, enormous estate, very private." Cecilia gripped the edge of the table. "I'm her assistant, and something was placed in her birthday cake. Something that's shaken her completely." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Sit, mademoiselle. Take a moment, then tell us everything." She sat, still visibly trembling. It sounds mad, but there was a message hidden inside the cake. Not just a message, a threat. The chatter in the room faded into insignificance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A threat? In the cake? How very un-British. You have my full attention." Cecilia drew a breath and steadied herself, her teacup rattling slightly as she set it down. The party was held at Rosehaven Hall, Lady Agatha's estate. It was to be a modest affair, family, a few close friends. Lady Agatha is very particular. Poirot nodded. "A woman of refinement, yes? She's sharp, commanding, but this shook her." Cecilia paused, then continued. "Chef Lorenzo was brought in specially. He made an elaborate gâteau, 4 tiers, filled with rose cream and sugared violets. It was a masterpiece. But when the cake was cut..." She hesitated. "Yes, mademoiselle?" Poirot prompted gently. "There was something inside. A small golden locket. Lady Agatha herself found it, embedded deep in the lower tier." At first, we thought it had been dropped by mistake. But when she opened it, her voice lowered. There was a photograph of a baby, a tiny one, wrapped in a white cloth, and tucked inside the other half of the locket, a scrap of parchment. It had just one word, in block letters: vengeance. Even I felt a chill then. She froze, Cecilia said, staring into her cup. Her expression changed completely. She stood up and walked out of the room without a word. Locked herself in her quarters. Since then, she's barely spoken. Poirot leaned back slowly. And no one knows who placed the locket. Number. But the worst came after. My heart sank. There's more? Yes, she whispered. That night, Mr. Felton, Lady Agatha's butler for 30 years, vanished. No note, no sign. Just gone. Poirot was silent for a moment. Then he folded his napkin with care and placed it beside his empty plate. Come, Hastings. We must go to Rosehaven Hall. I blinked. Now? Poirot's eyes were glittering. But of course, the cake has been sliced, and I intend to follow every layer to its source. Cecilia paused to gather herself, though her voice trembled slightly as she continued. Later that evening, after Lady Agatha had secluded herself in her private rooms, the household began to settle again, though there was a strange tension in the air. Julian, her nephew, tried to make light of it, while Miss Eveline, Lady Agatha's companion, looked positively haunted. I leaned in, fascinated. What of the locket? Was it examined? But the strangest part wasn't the message, nor the photograph. Poirot raised an eyebrow. No? Then what, mademoiselle? She hesitated. The butler. Mr. Felton. He vanished. Vanished, I repeated. Yes, he went to bed around 10, as usual. His room was neat, the bed undisturbed. In the morning, he was gone. No signs of a struggle, no note. His coat and hat were missing, but not his suitcase. Poirot folded his arms. Interesting. A man of precision does not leave without his shaving brush unless he means not to return. Exactly, Cecilia said. The staff are whispering. Some think he ran. Others think something happened to him. Something terrible. Poirot's gaze narrowed. And what do you believe? I don't know, she whispered. But I'm frightened, Monsieur Poirot. It's as if that message inside the cake has come to life, and it's tearing the house apart. Poirot nodded slowly, tapping a slender finger to his temple. There is something rotten in the heart of this household, Hastings, but it is not the sponge cake. When Cecilia left, Poirot remained silent for a long moment, his hands steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on the half-eaten raspberry tart before him. I stirred my tea, unable to contain myself. Well, what do you make of it? He looked up with that unmistakable gleam in his eye, the one that always meant trouble. Mon ami, he said softly, this is not merely a matter of dessert. It is a case of deeply buried sentiments, resentment, revenge, perhaps shame. Yes, a message hidden in cake, oui. But what is truly hidden lies in the heart. You think it's personal? I know it is personal. The locket, the infant's photo, the word vengeance. They are not chosen at random. They are symbols, Hastings, emotive weapons. This crime, or shall we say this warning, is no common prank. But what about the butler? Do you think he's been harmed? Poirot rose gracefully, buttoning his coat. Perhaps, or perhaps he knew too much. Either way, we shall discover the truth. I paid the bill as Poirot adjusted his gloves with fastidious care. The bell above the door chimed as we left, and as the spring air met our faces, I felt the subtle chill of something ominous rising. Rosehaven Hall awaited us, and with it, a mystery layered not unlike the very cake at its centre. Rosehaven Hall stood with the dignity of something long past its prime, its ivy-covered stonework whispering of secrets, and its crooked chimney stacks poking like accusatory fingers into the grey sky. As the motor car rattled up the gravel drive, I could not help but feel a slight unease settle over me, as though the estate itself had been holding its breath for far too long. Poirot, by contrast, seemed entirely unaffected. He leaned forward, adjusting his hat just so, and gave a pleased little nod as the facade of the manor revealed itself through the trees. "Ah," he murmured, "you see, Hastings. The symmetry. It is almost perfect. But there, to the left, one shutter is broken, a sign, perhaps, of the hidden crack beneath the facade." "I dare say the gardener's just been lazy," I muttered. "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied. "It is always the small detail that tells the greater story." The car came to a halt beneath a weeping willow at the front entrance, where Cecilia was already waiting for us, wringing her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said with clear relief. "The atmosphere in the house, it's unbearable." "I shall breathe it in, mademoiselle," Poirot replied lightly, "and perhaps I shall exhale with clarity." The great wooden doors creaked open at our approach, revealing the dim entryway and a butler I didn't recognize. "Mr. Venn," Cecilia said quietly. "He's new. Temporary." Poirot glanced at him once, sharply, before stepping inside. "I do not like replacements," he murmured, "especially when the original is still missing." As we stepped into the musty, chandeliered gloom of Rosehaven Hall, I had the uncomfortable sensation that we were being watched, not by one pair of eyes, but several. The drawing room was grand but faded, like an aging actress determined to preserve her charm with too much powder. Heavy curtains dimmed the morning light, and a faint perfume of lavender clung to the air, as if the very walls were trying to remember better days. Lady Agatha Morecombe sat upright in a high-backed armchair, wrapped in layers of silk and wool despite the mild spring weather. Her eyes, grey and sharp as cut stone, flicked toward us as we entered, though she did not speak. "Lady Agatha," Cecilia began gently, "this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the detective, and his associate, Captain Hastings." Poirot stepped forward, bowing. "Madame, I am at your service." She did not reply. Her gaze held his for a long, uncomfortable moment, before returning to the fireplace. It was as though she were looking through us, rather than at us. "Has she said anything?" I asked in a low voice. "Only 2 words," Cecilia murmured. "Just once. She said, 'It's begun.'" Poirot turned slowly, surveying the room with great care. A porcelain clock on the mantel ticked steadily. A silver tray held an untouched cup of tea. A single orchid in a vase stood on the side table, already beginning to droop. "It is a house that holds its breath," Poirot said softly, "and a lady who has sealed her lips not from madness, but from calculation." He turned to me. "Come, Hastings. Let us meet the rest of the cast." We were led down the corridor to the breakfast room, where the other members of the household were assembled. Julian Morecombe, Lady Agatha's nephew, greeted us with the smugness of a man who already considered himself lord of the manor. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp parting in his hair and a toothy grin that never quite reached his eyes. "Detective, eh?" he said. "Seems rather theatrical. Bit of a fuss over a cake." Poirot gave a small smile. "Monsieur, life itself is theatre, but in this play the drama is very real." Eveline Shaw, Lady Agatha's longtime companion, sat quietly beside the window. A small, wiry woman, grey-haired and austere, with watchful eyes, and the air of someone who had learned to listen more than speak. And then there was Giles Frobisher, the solicitor, heavy-set, courteous, perpetually dabbing his brow with a handkerchief, and Marian Felton, the late Mr. Felton's daughter. She kept mostly to herself, pale and anxious, her hands trembling as she poured herself tea. Each greeted us politely, but with a guardedness that was unmistakable. Poirot smiled graciously, but I knew that behind those observant eyes, he was already forming impressions, cataloguing every glance, every gesture. The game, as they say, was afoot. I must admit, I've always admired Poirot's unique ability to make a person talk without ever quite asking a question. The man would tilt his head just so, raise a brow, or utter a mild, "Ah, mais oui?" And suddenly, the poor soul before him would be recounting the entire trajectory of their life. It was with that same subtlety that he began his interviews at Rosehaven Hall. We started with Julian Morecombe, lounging in his late uncle's chair like he already held the deed to the estate. "So," Poirot began cheerfully, "you are the nephew of Madame Morecombe, oui? And heir presumptive." Julian gave a modest smile. "So I've been told, yes." "And you were present at the party when the cake was served?" "Of course, standing near the head of the table." Poirot nodded. "And did you notice anything unusual about the cake before it was cut?" Julian laughed lightly. "Only that it was a monstrous thing, Lorenzo's masterpiece. Seemed ashamed to cut into it." "And after the discovery of the locket?" "Well," Julian hesitated, "that was unsettling. But I thought it must be some foolish prank, a guest trying to start gossip." Poirot smiled gently. "Merci. Now, the precise time of the cake cutting." "Somewhere around 9, give or take." "Interesting. As Lorenzo later insisted, he delivered the cake at 8:30 precisely and left the dining room immediately after. Next came Miss Eveline Shaw. Her manner was clipped, precise, like someone who had long ago accepted the burden of silence. "I was seated beside Lady Agatha," she said. "She insisted on serving the cake herself. It was meant to be symbolic." "Symbolic?" "She said it was the one moment she could give a piece of something sweet to those who'd only taken from her." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, such a remark is not made without context." "I don't know what she meant," Eveline added quickly. "She often speaks in riddles." "And when the locket was discovered?" Lady Agatha went stiff. Then she left the table without saying another word. "Did anyone follow?" Eveline hesitated. "Mr. Felton did. I saw him leave just a minute later." Another inconsistency. Julian had claimed Felton remained at the table, assisting the staff. Poirot thanked her politely, then turned to Marion Felton. The poor girl looked as though she hadn't slept in days. "My father! He would never leave without telling me," she said. "Not after all these years." "You last saw him at the party?" "Yes. He helped serve the wine. Then I went to bed early. Headache. In the morning, he was gone." "And did anyone else visit your father that night?" She swallowed. Julian came to his room. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah?" "Something about a missing key, but Papa said he didn't know where it was. Julian left soon after." Now that was interesting. Giles Frobisher, the solicitor, was the final interview. His account was brief, polite, and memorized. I was seated at the far end of the table. Saw very little, I'm afraid. When the locket was found, I assumed it was a joke in poor taste. Yet Madame Morecombe did not laugh. He shook his head. Number She took it quite seriously. When we rejoined Cecilia in the library, Poirot was uncharacteristically quiet. "Well?" I asked. "What do you make of them?" He straightened his cuffs. "They are like actors who remember only their lines, but not the cues. Everyone was present, Hastings, and yet no one saw the moment truth entered the room. While the household buzzed uneasily with our presence, Poirot requested to see the remnants of the cake. Cecilia led us to the butler's pantry, where a covered tray waited beneath a bell jar. "It's all that remains," she said. "Chef Lorenzo wanted to dispose of it, but I thought you might wish to examine it first. Très bien, mademoiselle, Poirot said, lifting the glass lid with care. The cake was a wilted masterpiece, slumped slightly from having been cut through the centre, its frosting smeared and delicate sugar roses crumbling at the edges. Poirot circled the tray with a solemn air. Then he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a pair of silver tweezers. I blinked. You carry those regularly? But of course, one never knows when a crumb will betray a criminal. He began lifting pieces of sponge and inspecting the interior. After several moments of silence, he let out a satisfied hum. Observe, Hastings. Do you see where the locket was embedded? I leaned over. Yes, there's a hollowed space there. Precisely. But see how it was placed, angled downward, not dropped in by accident. And the sponge is slightly darker, heavier. That portion was re-iced, mon ami, to conceal the sabotage. You mean it was planted deliberately? Mais naturellement, not just the locket, but the entire structure. Someone modified this cake, likely after it was assembled. Lorenzo was not present. He delivered it at 8:30 and retired. So, who had access afterward? He turned to Cecilia. Was the cake left unattended? No, she said hesitantly. It was moved to the dining hall at 8:45. The dining staff were busy laying the table, and anyone could have slipped in. Poirot nodded slowly. And someone did. With purpose, with vengeance in their heart. He replaced the lid and turned to me with a satisfied expression. Ah, Hastings! We are now not in pursuit of a thief, nor a prankster, but an avenger. And vengeance, when sweet, is most often served with cream. There is something most uncomfortable about being in a house where everyone appears to be behaving normally, while it's quite evident that no one is. Over the course of the afternoon, Poirot and I mingled politely with the residents of Rosehaven Hall, each of whom seemed to be engaged in the delicate art of appearing innocent. Yet, I could see it in Poirot's eyes. He was unconvinced by their performances. We encountered Chef Lorenzo first, outside the kitchen garden, smoking a narrow cigarillo with the flair of an opera villain. His apron was stained with raspberry, and his mood was no less sour. I told you already, he muttered, arms crossed. I delivered the cake at 8:30. It was perfect, a sculpture. Poirot inclined his head. But you do not find it curious, monsieur, that your sculpture was used to deliver a message of vengeance? I bake cakes, not conspiracies. And yet, Poirot said softly, you were paid extra, were you not? Lorenzo stiffened. How do you? Ah, Poirot smiled. A baker's purse does not swell by itself. Who paid you, monsieur? I didn't see their face, he snapped. There was a note, with money. All it asked was that I embed the locket in the base layer. I assumed it was some sentimental surprise. I thought nothing more of it. A dangerous assumption, Poirot murmured. But I thank you. You have been almost honest. Lorenzo glared at us as we walked away, but Poirot seemed unbothered. Red herring number 1, I muttered, though a pretty suspicious one. Indeed, said Poirot, but a man who hides out of guilt may not always be guilty of the crime at hand. Later, we found Julian Morecombe seated in the study, sipping brandy in the middle of the afternoon. He greeted us with a smile far too self-satisfied for the circumstances. Care for a drink? Poirot declined, as he always did. Monsieur Morecombe, he said delicately, I must commend your calm demeanour, despite the rather sinister events unfolding around you. Julian leaned back. I've learned not to overreact. Things tend to sort themselves out. Such as your inheritance? Poirot asked smoothly. Julian's smile wavered for a moment. I beg your pardon? Poirot only shrugged. Ah, nothing. Just a passing observation. You were very quick to dismiss the locket as a prank, were you not? It seemed absurd. Sometimes, Poirot said, tapping his fingers together, it is the absurd that reveals the truth. Merci, monsieur. As we left the study, I whispered, You think it's him? Poirot's brow furrowed. He plays the part of the disinterested heir too well. It is a costume that may be hiding panic. But it was Eveline Shaw who truly intrigued Poirot. We found her alone in the rose garden, pruning dead blossoms with unnecessary force. Her expression was as tightly drawn as the strings of a violin. You were a nurse, were you not, mademoiselle? Poirot asked. She nodded. Before I came to Rosehaven, I served as a field nurse in India. Ah, then you are accustomed to pain and secrets. She met his eyes. Yes. And yet you never married? No. Sometimes, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, love and loss leave behind traces. She flinched, just slightly, but Poirot saw it. We shall speak again, he said with a slight bow. As we returned to the house, I asked, What was that about? Poirot replied, A woman who has known war and scandal learns to prune memory like she prunes her roses. But, mon ami, the past never stays buried, not truly. It was just after dinner that the second incident occurred, and it sent a new wave of unease through Rosehaven Hall. We were seated in the drawing room. Poirot was examining a chess set, rather absently, I thought, while I struggled to stay awake over an armchair. The sound of china clinking down the corridor signalled the arrival of evening tea. Marion Felton brought in the tray, her hands as unsteady as ever, and placed it before Lady Agatha, who still hadn't spoken a full sentence since the night of the party. She reached for the teacup slowly, but before it touched her lips, Poirot moved like lightning. Non, he cried, startling us all. He strode forward, snatched the cup from her hand and sniffed the contents. Aha, he said softly, as I feared. What is it? I demanded. Poirot turned to Marion. Bring me a silver spoon, mademoiselle, and quickly. She did as instructed. Poirot dipped the spoon, swirled the tea once, then dabbed a droplet onto a folded cloth from his breast pocket. He raised it to his nose, then handed it to me. I could detect nothing. Arsenic, Poirot said. A stunned silence filled the room. Julian stood. Are you certain? Not yet, but I have smelled this before, during a case in Cairo. The scent is faint, like almonds. It will be tested, of course, but I believe the tea was poisoned. Cecilia covered her mouth. Who would try to poison Lady Agatha? Poirot turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the room. That, mademoiselle, is now the central question. He walked back to the fireplace, folded his arms, and stared into the flickering embers. This was not meant to kill, I think, not yet. No, it was meant to frighten, to silence further, to push Lady Agatha deeper into her shell. And why? I asked. Because someone in this house fears the past being unburied. He gestured to the tea tray. Who prepared this pot? Marion paled. I boiled the water. Miss Eveline prepared the leaves. Julian delivered the cup, Eveline added. All three touched it. I murmured. Poirot nodded. Which means it was no accident. That night, Poirot remained awake long after I had retired. I found him the next morning in the library, reading an old family journal he had quietly borrowed from Lady Agatha's shelf. He looked up with that glint in his eye again. Now, mon ami, he said, we begin to see the shape of the story beneath the icing. I have seen Poirot question men accused of murder, bankers accused of embezzlement, and once, most memorably, a countess accused of poisoning her husband with a rare Indian plant. But I dare say, I have never seen him so quietly unsettling as he was that morning in Rosehaven Hall. He did not conduct interviews in the traditional sense. No, Poirot preferred what he called the orchestration of truth. a subtle shifting of conversation, a movement of tone, a glance at the right moment to shake loose a lie. We began in the conservatory, where the air smelled of lemon thyme and guilt. Giles Frobisher, the family solicitor, sat beneath a dusty fern, dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You must understand," he began nervously. "Lady Agatha has always been, how shall I put it, eccentric." "Eccentric?" Poirot echoed. "You mean she has a flair for the dramatic?" Frobisher chuckled weakly. Yes, I suppose so." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward, "she has not spoken in days, not even to her most trusted companion. Do you believe this to be mere eccentricity, monsieur?" Frobisher opened his mouth, then shut it again. "There is something else," Poirot said softly. "You are nervous, not because of what you know, but because of what you suspect." "I'm merely concerned," Frobisher mumbled. "This house is full of whispers." Poirot gave a slight smile. "And it is in the whispers, monsieur, that we often hear the truth." After he left, we moved to the music room, where Marion Felton stood by the window, her posture stiff. Poirot said nothing for a full minute. Finally, she turned. "You think my father is dead?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that your father knew something dangerous. He was loyal. Loyalty can be fatal." Marion trembled. "Do you think it's something to do with the baby? The photo in the locket?" Poirot's brow arched. "Why do you assume the baby is significant?" She looked startled, realizing she'd said too much. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "You have given me more than you know." We found Chef Lorenzo in the kitchen, hunched over a tray of cooling eclairs with an expression somewhere between defiance and despair. "You are a man of precision, are you not?" Poirot began. "The ganache, so even, the shoe, so light." Lorenzo snorted. "You came to compliment me, detective?" "I came to ask why a man so devoted to perfection would allow a foreign object to be placed inside his masterpiece." Lorenzo's jaw tensed. "I already told you. I was paid." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but now you will tell me how." The chef hesitated. "The morning of the party, there was an envelope in my coat pocket. Inside, 2 £20 notes and a folded instruction, which read, 'Place the enclosed locket at the base layer of the birthday cake. Do not ask questions. Do not speak of this.'" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you obeyed?" "I thought it was some elaborate birthday message, some romantic gesture." "Romantic gestures rarely begin with threats." Lorenzo looked away. "I didn't see who left it. I swear." Poirot leaned in. "But you suspected, did you not?" The chef's silence was answer enough. "Who?" Poirot asked softly. "I thought, maybe Julian. He came by the kitchen the night before, asked if the cake could be stored overnight in the scullery instead of the cold room, said the cold would ruin the sugar flowers." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "An heir concerned with sugar flowers?" Lorenzo shrugged. "It struck me as odd. But I didn't argue." "And did you place the cake in the scullery?" "I did." Poirot turned to me with that gleam in his eye again. "Voilà, Hastings. The locket did not travel far. It merely waited in the shadows." It was in the old chapel garden, an overgrown, ivy-choked relic of a forgotten age, that Poirot chose to confront Miss Eveline Shaw. She sat on a worn bench beneath a stone angel, her pruning shears resting on her lap, the sharp edge glinting in the low afternoon light. He approached her slowly, his shoes crunching against gravel. I trailed behind, uncertain why we were here, but aware that Poirot never walked without purpose. "Mademoiselle Shaw," he began, his tone gentle, almost paternal. "You have been loyal, yes. Dutiful. but I sense you carry a weight that does not belong solely to you." Eveline looked away. "I've carried many weights, Monsieur Poirot. Most of them are buried beneath these stones." Poirot sat beside her, folding his hands. "You served in India, did you not?" "Yes, as a nurse." "Then you understand the difference between a wound and a scar." She turned to him sharply. "Why are you here, really?" "To understand," Poirot said. "To bring peace where there is pain. To find a truth that was hidden inside a cake." Her lips trembled. "That cake! I saw it when it was brought in." "I knew immediately." "Knew what?" "The locket. I knew it. I'd seen it before, years ago." Poirot nodded slightly. "Go on, mademoiselle." She sighed. "It belonged to Agatha's sister, Florence. No one speaks of her anymore." "And yet," Poirot said, "it is always the one we do not speak of who leaves the deepest echo." Eveline's voice dropped. "Florence was reckless, romantic. She fell in love with a man she met while we were stationed in Madras. He was a translator, charming, poor, unsuitable by every standard. She became pregnant." Poirot remained still, letting the silence coax her onward. Lady Agatha was horrified. She arranged for Florence to return to England discreetly. The child, a boy, was to be adopted quietly. Florence never recovered. She fell into a fever shortly after and died within weeks. "And the child?" Poirot asked quietly. "No one knows. Or rather, no one was ever told." Poirot's expression did not change, but I knew him well enough to see the spark ignite behind his eyes. "You believe the locket was hers?" "I'm certain of it. Florence wore it constantly. It had her initials engraved at the base." Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. "You have done well, mademoiselle. There is no shame in love, only in the cruelty that buries it." She looked up at him with moist eyes. "You think this is about Florence?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that vengeance rarely belongs to the dead. It belongs to those they left behind." As we walked back to the house, I whispered, "You believe the child survived?" Poirot did not answer directly. He merely murmured, "Ah, Hastings." Sometimes the past does not knock. It breaks down the door. I found Julian Morecombe later that evening on the back terrace, tossing pebbles lazily into the garden fountain. The man exuded the same casual confidence he always did, but I noticed his shoulders were tenser, his smile more brittle. Poirot, with the same measured grace he employed at tea or during interrogation, joined him without a word. Julian turned. "Come to ask more questions, Monsieur Poirot." "Only one," Poirot replied. "And yet, depending on your answer, it may open 20 others." Julian chuckled. "You don't give up, do you?" "Jamais, monsieur. I have been accused of many things, obstinacy among them, but never of abandoning a question before it is answered." He paused, then said lightly, "Tell me again, if you please, where you were when the cake was served." Julian frowned. "I told you. I was near the head of the table, speaking with Frobisher. And the moment the locket was found..." Julian shrugged. I helped calm Marion. She looked like she might faint." "Curious," Poirot said mildly, "because Marion claims she had already left the table by that time." Julian's brow furrowed. "Well, perhaps I'm misremembering." "Ah," Poirot nodded. "Memory is so delicate, is it not? Especially when one's attention is divided." He turned slightly. "And the scullery? Do you recall visiting it the night before the party?" Julian froze for just a second. "What are you insinuating?" "Nothing, monsieur. I merely inquire because Chef Lorenzo mentioned you suggested the cake be stored there, out of the cold." Julian's voice stiffened. "Lorenzo talks too much, and you talk just enough," Poirot replied coolly. Enough to say things no one else has said. For instance, you mentioned the cake's sugar flowers, a detail visible only if one had seen the cake before it was unveiled. Julian's mouth opened, then shut. Poirot leaned closer. I advise you, monsieur, to think carefully. The truth, like a badly told lie, tends to unravel. Julian scoffed, but the colour had drained from his cheeks. As we walked back toward the hall, I asked, "You've got him, haven't you?" Poirot shook his head. "No. I have only loosened the thread. When it comes free, then we shall know." The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone corridors of Rosehaven Hall. In the flickering light of the drawing-room fireplace, Poirot sat very still, fingers pressed together, his gaze fixed on a stack of aged letters, yellowed with time. I had returned from a fruitless stroll through the grounds, hoping a bit of air would clear my increasingly foggy thoughts. To my surprise, Poirot had not moved since I left. "Are those Lady Agatha's?" I asked, nodding at the letters. Poirot didn't answer immediately. He lifted one delicate page, reading a line aloud in a soft, thoughtful tone. "They cannot take him from me, Agatha. I won't let them." "Whose handwriting is that?" I asked. "Florence Morcombe," Poirot replied. "The sister." I felt a chill despite the fire. So it's true. She had a child. Yes, a child born in secrecy, a child lost, but not forgotten. He motioned to the letter again. This one was written from a sanatorium in Surrey, dated the month before Florence died. She feared her son would be taken and raised by strangers. There is anger, Hastings, and fear. She begged Agatha to protect the boy, to keep him close. Do you think Agatha did? Poirot tapped his chin. That, mon ami, is the mystery. There is no adoption record, no official burial, no mention of a child in Lady Agatha's estate papers. But Florence's words do not lie. I sat opposite him. So either the child died, or someone raised him in secret. Poirot looked up at me, his expression grave. Or someone was told he had died, when in fact he did not. The thought hung in the air like smoke. And if that child lived, I asked slowly, then he may have grown up never knowing his origins, until now. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Poirot said, "Tell me, Hastings, have you noticed something curious about Marion Felton? The butler's daughter. What about her? She is devoted to this house, to Lady Agatha. She walks its halls like someone born to them. And yet, she has no claim to it. Her father was staff. She's lived here all her life. Oui, from infancy, taken in when her mother died in childbirth, or so the story goes." I stared at him. "You think she might be the child?" Poirot did not confirm it. Instead, he rose and said, "I think this house was built on silence, but the silence is breaking." He gestured to the letters once more. "We are no longer dealing with murder alone. We are dealing with identity, inheritance, and vengeance born of truth, long denied." The moon hung low over Rosehaven Hall as Poirot and I stood near the old rose garden, the air cool and heavy with anticipation. The flowers were beginning to wither at the edges, petals folding inward as if keeping secrets. "I say, Poirot," I began hesitantly, "this whole affair, it's become far more than a locket in a cake. There are more questions now than answers." "Oui," Poirot agreed, folding his arms behind his back. "Such is the nature of truth, Hastings. It does not present itself fully dressed. It reveals itself in layers, like a millefeuille." I chuckled, despite myself. "Still thinking in pastries, I see." "Always," he said, with a faint smile. Then, more seriously, "You asked me earlier if I thought the child survived. I tell you now, I believe not only that the child lived, but that the child stands among us." "You don't mean—" Poirot raised a hand. Let me finish, mon ami. Consider a message of vengeance placed within a birthday cake. Not merely a threat, but a statement. Not meant to harm immediately, but to awaken guilt, to disturb memory. And you think it was from the child? Poirot gave a small nod. I do. A child grown into an adult who has uncovered the truth, partially or fully, and seeks not wealth, but reckoning. Then who? He turned, eyes sharp. I do not know yet, but I suspect the answer lies not in who vanished, but in who has stayed close, unacknowledged. He looked back at the house where the windows glowed softly in the dark. Someone in Rosehaven Hall was never meant to be here, and yet they are the one person who may hold the entire truth. I shivered. Not from the cold, but from the strange certainty in his voice. The following evening, under Poirot's express instructions, the drawing room of Rosehaven Hall was rearranged, not with the haphazard touch of daily living, but with the precise symmetry of a stage set for final confession. Chairs were drawn into a semicircle before the hearth. A single lamp cast golden shadows over the faces of those gathered. Outside, rain tapped rhythmically against the windows, as though nature herself leaned in to listen. Every resident of Rosehaven was present. Julian Morecambe reclined with false ease, swirling brandy in his glass. Miss Eveline Shaw sat stiffly, fingers interlaced. Giles Frobisher dabbed his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief, and Marion Felton looked pale, her eyes darting between Poirot and Lady Agatha, who, silent as always, sat nearest the fire, her shawl draped like a mantle of frost. Poirot stood before them, a small figure amidst the grandeur, but he commanded the room with nothing more than a lift of his chin. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, thank you for your presence. I believe, after days of observation, inquiry, and reflection, that the time has come for truth. He paused, his fingers lightly touching the back of a chair. You see, one does not hide a message in a birthday cake for mischief. Non, one does so to provoke, to awaken something long buried. His gaze moved slowly across the room. This house has carried a shadow for years, a silence that has corrupted love, loyalty, even memory. But now, thanks to a locket, a photograph, and a word etched in menace, it shall speak. The tension in the room was electric. Poirot stepped forward. I will speak now, and when I finish, we shall all know what happened, not just to Mr. Felton, but to the child in the locket, and to Lady Agatha's peace. Poirot turned to Chef Lorenzo, who stood awkwardly near the door, his chef's whites uncomfortably crisp. Monsieur Lorenzo, Poirot began, you are a man of craft and precision. Your cake, I must say, was a marvel. But it was also a vessel, a message concealed beneath roses and cream. Would you care to explain how that came to be? Lorenzo shifted. I told you, I was paid to do it. I didn't know what was in the locket. Indeed, Poirot nodded. A sum of money was placed in your pocket, with a note instructing you to embed the locket in the base of the cake. You assumed, perhaps, a romantic gesture. Yes, the chef muttered. It seemed harmless. I didn't ask questions. A wise man might have, Poirot said, then turned to the others. But let us absolve Monsieur Lorenzo, for his role, while foolish, was not malicious. He moved to the silver tray where the remains of the cake had been placed under glass. You see, the cake itself tells us much. The layer containing the locket was darker, heavier, and the icing around it, reapplied, a false layer to hide intrusion. He pointed at Julian. And who, may we ask, recommended that the cake be moved from the cold room to the scullery the night before? Julian's expression stiffened. It was a suggestion, nothing more. Poirot's voice sharpened. A suggestion that gave you, and only you, the opportunity to tamper with it. But I didn't. Non, monsieur. Do not insult my intelligence. You were seen entering the scullery. You lied about being at the table when the locket was discovered. Your alibi, like the icing, is too neat. It covers something rotten. Poirot turned back to the group. The locket was not placed in that cake by chance. It was planted by someone who wished to ignite a fire where ashes had long cooled. He paused. Chef Lorenzo did not know what he carried, but someone else knew exactly what they were delivering. Julian Morecombe sat upright now, his composure cracking at the edges. Poirot paced slowly, his hands behind his back, eyes never leaving the young man. You see, monsieur, Poirot said, you were quite careful. You offered just enough detail to create a timeline, but not enough to prove it. I told you I was seated with Frobisher, Julian snapped. Ah, mais oui, but Monsieur Frobisher does not confirm this. In fact, he claims to have had little conversation during the meal, being seated at the far end of the table. You, on the other hand, placed yourself squarely beside Lady Agatha. Julian faltered. I may have misremembered. Indeed you did, Poirot exclaimed, finger raised. And what of Marian? You claim to have assisted her when she became faint. Yet she'd already left the room. Julian opened his mouth again, but Poirot did not allow him to speak. You also mentioned, unprompted, the sugar flowers on the cake, before the cake had been described in detail by anyone. Curious, n'est-ce pas? As if you had seen them privately. Perhaps when you entered the scullery and altered the base. That's absurd. Is it? Poirot tilted his head. Your motive, monsieur, is inheritance. You believed, perhaps rightly, that Lady Agatha intended to amend her will, leaving the estate to someone else. Julian's jaw clenched. You can't prove that. I do not need to prove thought, monsieur. Only action. Poirot turned to the fireplace and retrieved a small envelope from his pocket. This letter, he said, was discovered in the pages of Florence Morecombe's correspondence. It is unsigned, but typed. It reads, She knows. The child is here. If she reveals the truth, we both lose everything. Poirot looked around the room. Only one person would fear the loss of everything. Status, wealth, future. Only one person knew the timing of the cake, the location of the locket, and had motive to suppress a truth that could render their claim worthless. He stepped closer to Julian. You did not intend murder, no, but you did intend madness. You planted the locket to unseat Lady Agatha, to stir the past until it crumbled beneath her. And when that failed, you tried poison. The room held its breath. Julian stood slowly, eyes wild. This is preposterous. Poirot's voice was calm. No, monsieur, this is justice. The silence following Julian's final outburst was broken only by the delicate tick of the grandfather clock and the rain still whispering against the windows. Poirot did not speak immediately. He allowed the room to settle, to absorb the tension like the sponge of Lorenzo's ill-fated cake. Then, with the deliberate grace of a magician producing his next act, he turned toward Miss Eveline Shaw. She did not flinch, at least, not at first. But as Poirot's eyes met hers, calm and relentless, the faintest tremble passed through her shoulders. Mademoiselle Shaw, Poirot said gently, you have been a silent guardian of this house for many years. Your devotion to Lady Agatha is admirable. But your silence, it has also served to bury something else, has it not? Eveline's lips parted. I don't understand. Non, mademoiselle, Poirot said, taking a step closer. You understand all too well. You understand what it is to carry a burden alone. You understand shame, not your own, but imposed upon you. And most of all, you understand the pain of giving something up to protect a name. He reached into his coat and retrieved a small photograph, the one from the locket. This child, he said softly, was not Florence Morecombe's. It was yours. A gasp echoed from across the room. Lady Agatha did not speak, but her hands gripped the edge of her chair. Eveline stared at the photograph, her expression unreadable. Then she slowly nodded. I was 17, she said quietly. Agatha had taken me in. My family had died in India. She promised to educate me, raise me as a companion. I met someone, a young officer. Foolishly, I believed he loved me. She paused, closing her eyes. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. Agatha was furious, not at me, but at what it would mean for her name. So she created the lie. She said the child was Florence's. Florence had already passed. The timeline could be rearranged. Poirot's voice softened. You bore the child in secret. Yes, and I was told he had died. She swallowed. But I never saw a body, never had a grave. I always wondered. Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. You were not weak, mademoiselle. You were erased. And now the truth has stepped back into the light. The drawing room held its breath. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, as if nature herself braced for the final stroke. Poirot turned next to Marion Felton, who sat pale and stunned, her teacup trembling in her hand. And now, he said softly, we come to the final truth, the one hidden not in cake, nor in letters, but in plain sight. Mademoiselle Marion. She looked up, startled. Yes. You have long believed yourself the daughter of Mr. Felton, the butler. Yes, he raised me. Indeed he did. Poirot nodded. But he did not father you. Gasps echoed once more. Lady Agatha closed her eyes but said nothing. Poirot continued, his tone deliberate, like a surgeon revealing a buried wound. You were brought to Rosehaven as an infant. Your mother died shortly after childbirth. No birth certificate was filed under Felton's name. There are no records of your mother beyond household notes of a maid who arrived in the spring of 1907 and vanished by summer. Marion blinked, visibly struggling to process his words. Poirot moved closer, his voice soft but firm. You, mademoiselle, are the child in the locket. The child born to Eveline Shaw, hidden under the guise of shame, wrapped in secrecy, and raised by a loyal servant to preserve the dignity of a household that feared scandal more than sorrow. Marion shook her head. No, that can't be. Papa, Mr. Felton, he loved me. And he did, Poirot assured her. More than most fathers love their daughters. He raised you with care, gave you stability, but he knew the truth. And when someone tried to expose it, he confronted them, and he vanished. The room went still. Poirot turned to Julian. You were the one who found the letters. You realized that if the truth were revealed, Marion would have a rightful claim, not as the daughter of a servant, but as Lady Agatha's blood. That would mean your inheritance was in jeopardy. Julian looked away, his face darkening. Poirot gestured to the photograph again. The resemblance is clear. The locket, the face. It is Marion, hidden in the most visible place. And yet, no one saw. Lady Agatha stirred. Her voice was quiet, but carried across the room. I promised Eveline I would protect the child. But I failed. I let silence speak louder than love. Poirot bowed his head. And yet now, madame, you have the chance to set it right. Marion, wide-eyed and trembling, could barely form the question. So who am I? Poirot turned to her gently. You are Marion Morecombe, granddaughter to Lady Agatha, daughter of Eveline, and the rightful heir to a truth long denied. Poirot's eyes turned toward the window, where the rain had slowed to a quiet drizzle. The glass was beaded with moisture, and just beyond, the faint outline of the rose garden was visible, its blossoms drooping in the evening light. Let us now turn, he said gravely, to the fate of the man who, more than any other, paid the price for loyalty. Mr. Felton gasps murmured through the room. Poirot walked slowly to the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. Mr. Felton, devoted servant and silent guardian, knew the truth. He had seen the letters, heard the whispers of the past, and most importantly, he knew who Marian truly was. He had been entrusted with that secret since her infancy. And recently, he sensed that secret was no longer safe. He turned to face Julian. You approached him the night of the party. You demanded to know what he knew, and when he would not tell you, you followed him. You confronted him in the garden. Julian's eyes narrowed. You're inventing stories, Poirot. No, monsieur, I am revealing them. The gardeners had mentioned the earth beneath Lady Agatha's prized rose arbour had been disturbed recently. I asked them if any plantings had taken place. They said no. Poirot walked to a side table and produced a folded sheet of parchment. This morning, he continued, I instructed the groundskeeper to dig beneath the arbour's roots. Beneath the loam, barely concealed by a thin layer of canvas and soil, was a body. A horrified cry broke from Marian's lips. No. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Yes, Mr. Felton, struck once at the base of the skull and buried hastily beneath the very garden he once tended. Lady Agatha gasped, her face pale. Poirot's voice turned steely. Julian believed that by removing the man who knew the truth, the inheritance would remain his. But murder, monsieur, is like a rose. Its scent clings to the hand that cuts it. Julian said nothing, but his silence was damning. Poirot folded his arms. You see, the message was never meant for Lady Agatha. It was meant for you, to terrify, to provoke, and in doing so, you exposed yourself. The room had fallen into a stunned silence, each face drawn and pale. Poirot stood in the centre like a maestro who had just brought his orchestra to its crashing crescendo. And now, he said, the final stroke, the last brush of colour on this grim portrait. He turned toward Julian once more. Your motive, monsieur, was simple. You feared being supplanted. The estate, the fortune, these things were your expectation, your entitlement. But when you discovered the truth about Marian, when you realised Lady Agatha was planning to change her will, you took action. Poirot held up a small envelope. This letter, unsigned and typed, was planted among Florence's things. But the typewriter it came from was found in your study. A monogrammed sheet of Rosehaven stationery was recovered from your waste bin. Sloppiness, monsieur, born of arrogance. Julian's mouth twisted. You have no proof of that. Mais oui, Poirot replied calmly. I do not require fingerprints, monsieur, only logic. You forged the letter to suggest someone else in the house knew the truth. Then you used that forgery to manipulate the cake's creation, through bribery and manipulation, and when Lady Agatha did not react as you expected, you resorted to poison. Cecilia gasped. The tea? Oui, the tea. Arsenic, a classic method, subtle and effective, especially in small doses. But it did not kill because you did not intend it to. You wished only to break her spirit, to silence her permanently, without violence. Poirot's gaze was fierce now. But murder, monsieur, murder leaves traces, in the way you speak, in the lies you tell, and ultimately, in the actions you try to erase. He stepped forward. You destroyed a man who had only love in his heart. You buried truth beneath roses, and you nearly erased a woman's identity for the sake of silver and stone. Julian stood motionless. Poirot turned to Lady Agatha. Madame, the truth is before you. What remains now is justice. Lady Agatha finally spoke, her voice cold and clear. Summon the police. Poirot bowed. Et voilà. It was shortly after Poirot's final declaration that Julian Morecombe's composure snapped entirely. He rose suddenly from his chair, knocking over the side table with a crash, and bolted for the hallway like a man possessed. "Stop him!" cried Lady Agatha, but Poirot simply lifted a hand. "Let him run," he said calmly. "He will not get far." I admit, I followed, heart racing, down the corridor and out onto the rain-slick drive. The gravel crunched beneath Julian's hurried steps as he made for the garage. But before he could reach the doors, two uniformed officers stepped from the shadows, pistols drawn, their silhouettes crisp in the mist. "Julian Morecombe," the elder of the two barked, "you are under arrest for the murder of Thomas Felton and attempted poisoning of Lady Agatha Morecombe." Julian froze. In that moment, the desperation drained from him, leaving only disbelief. You had the police waiting," he stammered as Poirot stepped forward behind me, entirely unhurried. "Mais bien sûr," Poirot said. "Even the most beautiful rose garden needs tending, monsieur, and a wise gardener prepares for pests before they dig too deep." As the handcuffs clicked shut, Julian's expression was one of bitter defeat. The illusion of aristocratic invulnerability had crumbled, revealing nothing but a frightened man clinging to stolen soil. Poirot turned to me, adjusting his cuffs with satisfaction. "It is always so, Hastings. The criminal believes himself cleverer than he is, but he forgets. La vérité, she blooms in silence and in shadow, and always comes to light." The drawing room was quiet once more, save for the gentle ticking of the mantel clock. Lady Agatha sat stiffly in her chair, her face pale but composed. Marian stood opposite her, motionless, as though caught between duty and disbelief. Poirot and I lingered near the door, respecting the moment. At last, Lady Agatha raised her hand, not in dismissal, but in summoning. Her voice, though frail, carried clearly across the room. "Come here, child." Marian approached hesitantly. "You are not who I thought you were," Lady Agatha said, her tone grave. "But neither was I. I believed I could preserve this house, this name, by locking the past away." She reached for Marian's hand and held it tightly. "But you are Morecombe by blood. You are mine, and I see now it is not shame you carry, but strength." Marian's eyes brimmed with tears. "I never wanted anything more than to belong." Lady Agatha offered a small, rare smile. "Then you shall. This house has stood too long on silence. It is time it echoed with truth." Poirot stepped forward, bowing deeply. "A most elegant decision, madame. One made not with pride, but with heart. It is, as they say, la dernière pièce du puzzle." The old matriarch inclined her head. "Then let it be done." I felt, quite profoundly, that a chapter long overdue had been closed, written not in inheritance, but in forgiveness. Later, Poirot and I strolled through the garden paths, the earth still damp from rain, the rose arbor quiet and mournful. "You knew where to look," I said, before anyone else suspected. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Ah, mon ami, but it was not the earth that spoke to me. It was the people." He knelt beside the roses, his fingers brushing the soil without touching it. "You see, when Julian told us Lady Agatha's roses had been repotted weeks before, that was a mistake. I had walked this path. I saw no sign of soil disturbed, no broken stem, no mulch replaced." "But that could have been anything," I protested. "Non." Combined with his nervousness, his habit of glancing toward this spot each time Felton's name was mentioned, that Hastings was the key. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his knees. "A criminal may conceal his footprints, but not his instinct to protect the lie. Julian feared this garden because he had buried the proof beneath it." "And yet," I said, "you had no physical evidence at first." Poirot smiled. "Number. But the psychology of guilt, it leaves trails. In words, in glances, in silence, you must listen to what is not said. We walked in silence for a few paces. You truly believe Marian will bring peace to this house? I asked. Poirot nodded. She is the bridge between the past and the future, a life hidden, now revealed. Then, with a smile, he added, and perhaps she will even grow better roses. We were preparing to leave Rosehaven when Cecilia intercepted us in the foyer, holding a pale lavender envelope. Her expression was solemn. It was found on Miss Eveline's desk, she said. Addressed to you, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot took it gently, then opened it with care. Inside was a single sheet of cream stationery, the handwriting neat and unmistakably hers. He read it aloud, softly. To Monsieur Poirot, you are correct. Marian is my daughter. I have carried this secret like a shadow, always beside me, never far. At first, I believed silence would protect her, from judgment, from scandal, from the same fate that destroyed Florence. I thought the past, if buried deep enough, would lose its power. But silence is not protection. It is a prison. And now, truth has broken through. Perhaps I was a coward. Perhaps I was only a mother, afraid of what the world might do to the child she could not claim. Thank you for giving her back to me, even if she may never know it. Eveline Shaw. Poirot folded the letter with quiet reverence and slipped it into his inner pocket. She knew, I said. All along. Oui, Poirot nodded. And in her way, she loved deeply, but love cannot thrive in silence. It must speak, even if only once. We left the letter with Lady Agatha. She did not weep. She only placed it beside the photograph from the locket and whispered, At last. The train had just begun to pull out of the countryside station, when Poirot, tucked neatly into his compartment with his valise at his feet, leaned back with a sigh of satisfaction. Well, Hastings, he said, another case closed. Another truth brought into the light. I chuckled. And all over a slice of cake. Poirot gave a dramatic shake of his head. Ah, but mon ami, never underestimate the danger of cake. Behind the whipped cream and delicate sponge lies the potential for secrets most bitter. I suppose next time we attend a birthday, we should check for explosives in the fruit filling. He raised an eyebrow. Or perhaps for vengeance in the vanilla. I laughed, then grew thoughtful. You know, Poirot, it's odd to think that something as festive as a birthday cake could set so much in motion. Poirot leaned forward slightly, steepling his fingers. That is precisely why it is so effective. Who would suspect? The cake is a symbol of sweetness, of innocence, but symbols, like people, may be corrupted. He tapped his temple. The key, Hastings, is not to look for the drama, it is to observe the imbalance, a locket that does not belong, a silence that is too complete, a sugar flower described too soon. I thought it was all coincidence, I muttered. He smiled. And that, mon ami, is what the murderer always counts on. The train rattled on toward London, and Poirot, with a faint smile, closed his eyes. I, however, couldn't help glancing warily at the tea trolley as it passed, and for once, I politely declined the lemon sponge. And so, as the countryside slipped past our train window, and Poirot dozed with the calm of a man who had once again untangled a web of silence and deceit, I found myself reflecting on the curious nature of truth. It had begun with a birthday cake, harmless, celebratory, and ended with a murder uncovered, a hidden heir restored, and a family finally forced to confront its past. All because Poirot, with his little grey cells, had spotted what no one else did. Not what was present, but what was missing. Funny, isn't it? I murmured, breaking the silence. All those clues, all those lies, and in the end, it was the roses that betrayed him. Poirot did not open his eyes, but his moustache twitched knowingly. Ah, Hastings, as I always say, it is not the obvious that solves the case, but the overlooked, the soil beneath the flowers, the silence in a crowded room. Truth, mon ami, blooms, even in the darkest garden. To which I replied, with a grin, "Remind me never to trust a sponge cake again." What do you think was the single most important clue that led Poirot to the killer? Was it the locket in the cake, the sugar flowers, or something even subtler? Tell us your theory in the comments. We'd love to hear your little grey cell at work. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every single week. More Poirot cases are coming soon, and as always, the truth will be found, one brilliant deduction at a time.